Hello, welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast. I'm here with Chuck and Chris. Today we will be discussing the unfortunately new shooting in Texas, in Uvaldi, Texas. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. So I think there's two big pieces to this, and the first one is, what the hell is happening in the country where these shootings just will not stop happening? And the other piece to this is the response by the police, and who's really responsible for, what was essentially a failure on some level. It was a failure. So I guess I'll go first. And I've been talking about the cop situation for about 2 days now on Facebook, so I'm well versed in that. As far as why this keeps happening, I guess we all have our guesses, right? And there's a huge issue with mental illness in this country. There's a huge issue with bullying in this country. I probably disagree a little bit on the gun issue with Chuck. I think that there's definitely a gun issue in this country that we need to get under control. I'm not sure how we do that. I don't know a lot about guns. I know whenever I get into a debate about guns with somebody who knows about guns, I always lose it. So I can't sort of understand how this conversation can actually happen without just at least considering the fact that we have an incredibly large number of guns in this country, and the same types of guns keep being used, all that kind of stuff. But in this particular incident, it looks like a 18-year-old kid, again, a young kid, initially he shot at his grandmother. Tell me if I'm wrong about this. Initially, he shot at his grandmother or shot her.
He shot her in the face.
Shot his grandmother in the face, gets in his truck, drives towards the school, whatever the school was that he went to, crashes his truck, gets out of it, starts shooting at some people who came over to him. And I believe they ran away. Then he goes wandering over to the school. There's enough time where he ends up finding an entrance that's unlocked. Apparently a teacher had left it unlocked because they went and got a cell phone from their car. He gets in the school at around 11:31 a.m. About 4 minutes later, during that 4 minutes, I'm sure that he shot people. About 4 minutes later, two cops come in behind him. There's some shootout that takes place. The cops are injured in some way. It's sort of confusing. I'm not sure how they were injured, but for whatever reason, they, decided to stay out of the school after that. He, according to the police reports, then barricaded himself into a room. The police basically state that they thought at this time that he had barricaded himself into a room that was not, that there weren't any kids in. It's suspicious, to say the least, to understand why they would just assume at this point there's no children in that room. I can't deny that. So in any event, I guess after about 20 minutes, 19 or something more cops come in the school. They're, I guess, standing in the hallway, just kind of at a standoff with this guy. According to reports, that's when this guy was also shooting lots of people in this 20-minute period. There was nothing done. The cops didn't. God, when I say this out loud, it sounds even worse. It does. It just sounds terrible. In this 20-minute period, it doesn't seem like anybody went in. According to the police, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they said that they still thought this guy was there by himself, so they didn't charge in the room. I think at around 12:15, something like that, or 12:10, that's when the federal border patrol people and other federal agents started showing up. Apparently, some of these agents just came from their houses, jumped in their pickup trucks, and just rolled up to the school. They didn't wait for anybody. They just came there. And as soon as they got there, the commander, whoever this commander guy is, I forget his name, Hispanic guy, I can't remember his last name, was basically told them to stand down. They, according to reports, now this is from an NBC report. I don't know if it's been confirmed with anybody else, but at this point, they went off and started like planning to charge into the room on their own. So they sort of at this point said, we got to figure something out. There doesn't seem to be a plan here. And about a half hour after they arrived at, I think, 12:50, something like that, they charged into this classroom with a like a shield of some kind, a bulletproof shield. They killed the guy, and then whoever the remaining children were in there were saved. It's important to note, and I know the viewers of this will get really mad at me if I don't mention this, and for good reason, that there were several 911 calls during this period of time. There were calls from kids, there were calls from teachers. It seems all over the place. So this makes it even more difficult to believe what the commander and the police are saying about not knowing the kids are in there, because, hey, you're receiving like a bunch of calls while you're in there. What the hell? So at the end of the day, you're looking at a good hour, more than an hour, almost an hour and a half of the time span that this guy, this kid, this 18-year-old kid is in the school killing people. And the cops are apparently trying to get their shit together. You know, when this first rolled out, I think everybody, you know, all of the cop haters out there, and when I say cop haters, I'm not talking about people who hold police responsible. I think that is totally fair. I think we need to do that. I don't think that, I think you always have to hold them accountable. I'm talking about people that see, you know, a 5-second clip and have just decided that the entire, you know, police force in the United States is corrupt and out there killing everyone in, you know, some rage. But everybody, they jumped right on this. And so I kind of pushed back and I said, let's wait to see what happens. Then I heard the initial police report and I defended it a little bit more. But as, again, information started continually trickling out, it seems like more and more that this wasn't just, you know, the commander not providing the officers with information, although that probably did happen. It doesn't, I mean, it sounds like there was a total collapse of leadership on his part. And, but this was also, the cops did hear what was going on. They have a People magazine interview with a cop, according to People magazine, an anonymous interview. And the guy was like, look, we heard a bunch of shots, we could hear screaming. And so, you know, we wanted to, he called it, you know, overthrow the leadership at that point and go in by themselves. And apparently they obviously decided not to do that. I should say at this point too, that somewhere in this whole chaos of the situation, there were children being saved. And it seems like that was consistent throughout the period of time. I don't know, and again, because the facts are so murky at this point, I don't know who was saving who, where they were, what classroom relative, you know, where the shooter was relative to where these kids were escaping from. Was it the same classroom, and etc. So there are a lot of facts in this that still haven't come out. And so, you know, I think, you know, we should be mindful of that as we talk about it. But as somebody who is one of the more, intense defenders of police, you know, in situations like this, I'm having a hard time. And I think it was a sad day for law enforcement and a really sad display in Uvaldi. And to make matters worse, this friggin' town has a entire force dedicated to protecting the school. Like they created like a 6-person force. And this happens. The resource officer, who knows where the hell he was, wasn't on the friggin' campus. And so, we could go down the timeline and I can give you 15 examples of where they could have and should have done something and didn't. But I'll shut up and hand it over to whoever wants to chime in next.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and start off. I've heard it pronounced Uvaldi and Uvaldi, so I'm not going to be too terribly concerned about that. Arredondo is the name of the
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
police chief at the time, and you're right, Nick. It is very significant that a town this small, 16,000 people, had the gumption to not only, they got a town police department, 16,000 people, yeah, that makes sense, but to have a separate law enforcement entity for your schools is significant. Usually on-site law enforcement at schools is provided by the local sheriff's department, town police department, city police department, whatever. But they had a separate police force specifically for the school system, which is very unusual. It is a very conspicuous amount of protection that you are providing, and to have that protection absolutely evaporate in the face of something this bad is unforgivable. Again, I generally, I'll say up until a couple of years ago, I generally gave the benefit of the doubt to police officers, just as a rule of thumb. Their job, I have a certain amount of respect for anybody who can do a job that I know I can't, and I could not be a police officer. I don't have the people skills or a whole lot of things, quite frankly, but because police officers are usually dealing with people who are having the worst day of their lives. Any day you experience where a police officer gets involved, it's not going to be a good day usually. Sometimes, most of the time, fortunately, it's a speeding ticket or running a red light or whatever. But yeah, quite often you associate the worst day of your life with police being on the scene. So they have a tough job already. And that's why I've, in the past, at least before the pandemic, I usually gave them the benefit of the doubt. Without going through all of the timeline that you talked about, Nick, and you did a good job recapping all this madness. The fact is that for at least 40, possibly 60 minutes, Arredondo and 18 other police officers were on the other side of a door where they knew a gunman who had fired shots at police officers had gone in. In order to justify doing nothing, you have to make, number one, the assumption that that classroom is empty. An empty classroom in a school on a school day is a rare thing. I don't know of any school that has too much room. Most every school I have has had to bring in outdoor trailers for classes. In terms of capacity, empty classrooms during a school day are very, very rare. But you have to assume that. And you also have to ignore the fucking gunfire that you hear on the other side of the door. You have to ignore the screaming children that you hear on the other side of the door. How do you ignore that? How do you sit there with all that evidence in front of you? We know an armed man who has fired at police officers went through that door. Now I hear shots. Now I hear children screaming. Now we're getting word of children in that fucking room calling 911 saying, please come help us. I'm still alive. He's here. Given all that information, how can you still stubbornly cling to the conclusion that this is an isolated, barricaded incident and you can sweat it out and negotiate with him? That's unforgivable. That's absolutely unforgivable. I cannot imagine any exculpatory evidence that will make me think otherwise. Now, the next level is the officers, apart from Arredondo, who are having their chief tell them, stand down, stand down. They hear the gunshots. They hear the children screaming. I think that's a damn good time for mutiny. I think that is a perfect time for mutiny. I'll worry about the consequences later. Right now, on the other side of the door, there are little children that are being stitched by a madman. I have a gun. Let's get it on. This is what I signed up for. gruesome though it may be. Again, if it were a situation where they saw the gunman go into this door and they knew it was an empty room and they were not hearing gunshots or anything else, you can almost understand, okay, let's sweat him out. But there was no reason to assume the classroom was empty, none whatsoever. And after you heard gunshots and children screaming, to continue to assume that it was empty? No, 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 no. This does not add up at all. I'll shut up now.
I think, yeah, there's not much room to disagree with anything you guys are saying. It was pretty much the ball was dropped. I think about me personally, I would personally assume by default that there are children. I think that would be the safe assumption, to assume that there are people if there's a default position to use. But for some reason, they used the default that he's isolated alone, and that was at the expense of some children. And we don't, and just trying to figure out how that communication failure happened, because they're calling in the 911 that whole time, and somehow the decision got made. We're told right now that the narrative is that, that they were assuming that it was, the isolated barricading himself in there by itself. But I mean, that's just what they're telling the news right now. We don't know really what the true story is. We've had, changed up narratives in this story as well as other police stories as well in the past. So we just don't really know what the real deal of what's going on is. And in terms of what you were just saying, Chuck, to kind of, this would be a good time for a mutiny or something like that. When I think about the times when police officers tend to go against, other officers, like say if they see one officer that's going rogue and beating up somebody that they shouldn't be or something like that, we often notice that police officers don't intervene at all. A lot of times it seems like they're intentionally making sure they're not looking that direction so that they can't be held
responsible. George Floyd video comes to mind. Yeah.
And I know there was a black woman in, I think it was in Buffalo, New York, maybe about a decade ago or something like that. She ended up losing her job after she intervened with an officer who was beating up a suspect one time. And I think after what happened a couple of years ago with George Floyd, they started re-looking back into her case because, people were starting to think like, well, maybe there are some good times to intervene and stop things. But I don't know. Most of my experience of looking at, whether it's police, militaries, not just United States, but around the world and stuff, people tend to just follow orders most of the time. And even in ugly cases like this, where you think that maybe for the kids, they would break ranks and do something, people just tend to march in order. And that's the scary part about things, because, when you live in a country where, authoritarianism is rising, and, you end up, we had a president who wanted to attack protesters and stuff like that. And, they're giving orders down the chain, and you got to wonder, is there a point where people will, do their own thing and go rogue at her once in a while? And, and oftentimes that's not the case. What the orders that come down often are what ends up being executed. So it's unfortunate for the kids in this scenario that, some more people's lives could have gotten saved. I also read about a woman, I can't remember her name right off the top of my head right now, but in terms of, they were talking about some of the parents, there was a woman, she said she had got handcuffed outside trying to get inside, and but she claimed she got handcuffed by one of the marshals, and then she later on they convinced the marshal to loosen her up, and she ended up leaving the area. And this was in I think the Wall Street Journal. But she left the area and ended up climbing a fence and running inside and bringing her kids back out or something like that. And I was just wondering, how did that all happen or something? That's and I heard about somebody being pepper sprayed and all this other stuff, in terms of trying to get in there and do something about their kids. It's just overall, it's a sad scenario. It was a breakdown in, the law enforcement job and duty there. And some of the other things that just come to mind when I think about it also is that there's been some Supreme Court cases that have said things such as that, the police do not have a responsibility to protect and save your life, basically. I know there was a 2005 case against, was it Castle Rock, Colorado, where a woman she had put some restraining orders out and against a man, I think it was her husband or ex or something like that, but the father of her kids basically, and he ended up swooping up the kids out of the front yard and violating the order. And the order was supposed to be that the police were supposed to go and arrest them, but they didn't. I guess they dropped the ball on doing their job, and the man ended up killing the kids or something like that. And it was just an ugly situation. And so she wanted to kind of sue them because of it, but the Supreme Court basically said that they don't have a duty. There's no constitutional duty that requires them to have to protect our lives. And so I know there's a lot of people that are mad at this situation and wondering whether there could be some type of punishment for whoever's responsible for dropping the ball in this situation. But I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't, at the end of the day, that nobody actually serves any big punishment. I mean, you might get somebody to resign on their own or something like that and just feeling bad and remorseful, but whether or not there's actually, whether legal consequences, either in a civil matter or criminal matter, that's, I doubt that would actually happen.
I know if I lived in Uvaldi, I would not cooperate with police anymore. No, you guys are terrible. You failed us at the moment of truth, and anyone who, oh gosh, it's hard to put into words. How can you possibly have the public's trust in that small community after such an egregious error? Now, again, you're right, Chris, in that usually what happens is the orders are followed, and afterwards, I was just following orders. Well, in Nuremberg, that didn't work. But again, I'm not comparing them to Nazis by any stretch, but the Nazi officers and soldiers who were just following orders, they had 4, 5, 6, 7 years to stew over whether or not to follow those orders. These guys had only a few minutes. And so I'm not going to hold them in that regard. Arredondo's, the way or the decision he reached is absolutely unforgivable, 100%. No less than his resignation would suffice. But then again, that's going to be very small consolation. I would most certainly like to see any pension that he's accrued be denied. Again, I think it was that bad. I think it was terrible. And boy, as if we didn't already have enough reason to be wary of the public's relationship with law enforcement. Now this on top of the Supreme Court's in no uncertain terms ruling that there is no constitutional duty for the cops to protect you. And now, are we being unfair and holding them to a high standard? Fuck no. If we as a society are going to arm somebody, give them the power of arrest, give them the power to legally use deadly force, you're goddamn right we're going to hold them to a high standard. Why should we not hold them to it? It would be asinine not to hold them to a high standard. And if they don't like the high standard, then they can sell term life insurance, but you can't be a cop. If we are, as a society, are going to give certain people guns, arrest authority, and when necessary, a license to kill, that is going to come with high expectations. If you don't like it, there's a million other jobs out there for you.
So just sort of evaluating this and trying to sift through what the hell happened and what was going through this commander's head during this process. Like, what was he thinking and what were these cops thinking? The best scenario that I can come up with is that they just felt like if they were to, I'm assuming, charge through that door, or if they were too aggressive and something happened and the situation got escalated and all of a sudden a bunch of people were killed, right? That would have blown up as well, and they didn't want to be responsible for that. So that fear of what would have happened as a result and what was going on behind that door at that time probably, I'm assuming, made them a little bit more reluctant.
You're being very charitable, Nick.
I am being very charitable. The only reason I'm saying that is because I'm trying to understand the rationale behind what they were thinking in the moment. And like, I'm not a police officer, but I am a child investigator, and I work with cops all the time, constantly. I too, my job is in no way the same as a police officer, but when I'm meeting people, I'm meeting them at their worst too, right? The difference is I'm like a child cop kind of, and with no gun, no ability to protect himself. So I really do, when I see these situations, they're personal to me, because I understand how challenging it is to manage a really highly chaotic situation. Not to that extent, but generally speaking. And I know that when you have people sort of scrutinizing you from the outside, oftentimes that scrutiny is unfair. And you get a lot of, and when I see people with like cell phone footage and stuff, and you see something and it's like, well, that looks really bad, but we have no context for it, right? And that's one of the reasons. So I'm trying to get in their head and just try to kind of put myself in their perspective in this situation. In this instance, this was a force. I mean, the commander, I'm assuming, I'm pretty sure, was in charge of this school force that was designated for this particular scenario. Like, I mean, they should have been trained for it, right?
They were.
Like,
they completed training 8 weeks ago, according to what
okay,
what I read today on AP.
right. And just if you go through like the timeline of events, it's like, okay, well, when the initial, when the cops, got into a firefight with this guy initially, they were going in the school after him. He shot at them, and then he barricaded himself in the room. Why didn't they immediately go back in? Like, that right there could have saved 15 lives. You know what I mean? Like, if they had gone in at that moment, that would have made a huge difference. Maybe they would have died. I don't know. But that again is what you signed up for in this, as you're at your job. As far as, so one of the things that people have been saying about this incident, and I'm a little bit, I'm not in agreement on, is, so you have the parents outside, and parents know their kids are in there. So every single one of them is going to be at 10, right? And there's no doubt that it's justifiable, and none of us, I don't care who says what, is going to act differently, right? That's your kid. It's your heart, your soul, everything. However, as police outside trying to sort of control that situation, in your mind, if somebody gets through there and a parent runs up to a window, or whatever they do, and there is a process in place, and they have a plan and they're executing that plan, and a parent comes in and they interrupt that plan. Now, there wasn't in this instance, unfortunately, but if that did happen, they could get everybody killed, right? Because all of a sudden now, boom, there's a person. Now we got to insert them into the whatever the plan is. So I mean, yeah, people were being held down. I don't, obviously I don't think using tasers or whatever they were doing, handcuffing, moms, stuff like that. I don't understand the individual scenarios there, but I think all these people online that are like, yeah, they should have let the parents go and save the kids, right? Like, no, man, that is not what you should be doing. I had a lot of people say that to me, and I'm like, all right.
Well, in general, usually the police don't, drop the ball as bad as it just happened here. And so we're thinking about it after the fact. So it's like, since these police did such a bad job, it's like, well, let the parents in, But
we obviously assumed they were going to do a good job.
They have to control the crime scene. But one thing that you were saying that I was thinking about was there were some years back when there were some cases where there were some perverts that were breaking into school and doing sexual stuff with kids, basically, as a coming in with a gun and holding everything hostage. I don't know if you guys remember that, but there was at least 2 different cases that it happened once, and then there was like a copycat not long afterwards that did something very similar like that. And I actually remember watching on the news back then, they were talking about that after that incident happened, that, a lot of places that took the mindset that they would just go in immediately, because if they sit there and wait and try to negotiate from the outside while this person just going down the line, doing all this terrible stuff to the kids in there, that's even worse. And so that's what comes up in my mind. And then I compare that to this situation. Obviously, it wasn't the same type of situation, but if you don't really know what's going on inside there, then, you know, obviously they didn't have that same default type of position in that particular case. I probably should have looked it up before I got on here, but I can't remember exactly what that story was.
I remember after Columbine, one of the immediate concerns or criticisms was exactly what we heard this week. Why did you wait? Why did you wait? Remember, specifically after Columbine, the delay in going in and confronting the shooter was one of the biggest criticisms. And I've seen several sources share from the Texas Department of Public Safety that in an active shooter situation, your number one goal is to get at that shooter. Be they barricaded or not, they are your target. You must neutralize them as soon as you possibly can. And I kind of, again, if Arredondo had concluded immediately, and I guess he did, but concluded immediately, okay, he went into that classroom. All right, that's good. He's holed up. He can't hurt anybody. But to continue thinking that for 40 minutes after all the other evidence, the shots, the screams, I can forgive him for making that in a split-second decision if that were the case here. Again, oh, okay, he's barricaded now, it's okay. 2 minutes later, boom, boom, boom. Ah! He's not barricaded, he's an active shooter. That has to change your tactics immediately. It has to. But in every scenario that I've read from law enforcement, your number one goal above all others is to get to that shooter and neutralize them ASAP. I remember after Columbine, that was the number one concern. And here we are, 23 years later, and the exact same thing happened again. I keep going back to that, not only the decision not to go in, but the constant reinforcement of that decision. We are learning that the Border Patrol got there 30 minutes before they eventually broke in, and we are told that they were told by the incident commander, Arredondo, to stand down. He's barricaded. And of course, the Border Patrol guys heard the same evidence to the contrary. And I'll be interested in seeing if the fact that they eventually did go in and busted down the door, was that a mutiny? Was that eventually them saying, fuck you, we're going in? Or if Arredondo at some point finally said, okay, go in. I'll be interested to see what the final decision was there before they actually breached it.
Let me throw a scenario at you. Just, hypothetically, maybe, potentially, right? Do you think it's possible that there's just a lot of facts we don't know about, and for whatever reason, they evaluated the scene, there were kids in this classroom, there were kids in that classroom, and they said, well, based on the, where these people are, relative to these people and all of this, if we go in now, these people are likely to get, do you feel like there was a little bit of that kind of going on? Like, well, we want to go in there and get this guy, but we're afraid. Number one, we don't know specifically. I don't know how they didn't know, but if their kids are in there, but maybe they were, maybe he that was part of the analysis. I don't know. It's just so mind-boggling to me to think that there's 20 cops. I mean, have you ever seen 20 cops together? It's a lot of fucking police, dude. Like right in one area, especially in a school. I mean, that's a lot of cops. I don't know how they were stationed, where they were, whatever, but they must have had some idea where this guy was, right? So you have 20 cops in this place. There's gunshots going off, and it's sort of irrefutable at this point to state that there wasn't gunshots going off, because they were on the 911 call. The cop who was interviewed by people heard it. The kids on the 911 call were saying they were shooting. So there was like multiple reports in this period of time while these 20 cops are in there, right? So like, I'm just trying to understand the what's going on in that conversation for that long a period of time, because it just blows my mind. The other question I thought was interesting that Chris brought up is, I mean, how do you deal with this type of situation? I mean, at the end of the day, let's just say it was cowardice or it was just complete incompetence, one or the other. With the exception of, I mean, obviously these people should be fired. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. Anybody who had any sort of part in it at all and knowledge of it should be reprimanded, right? But what is the, and should there be a consequence for that type of stuff, and what should it be?
That's a good question. A lot of it, of course, depends upon the level of culpability. But again, unless there is some very unusual information that we've not been made privy to at this point, certainly the primary blame lies with the incident commander, Arredondo, the guy at the scene that was calling the shots. And yes, his officers are supposed to follow his orders. But again, if he made that determination, and I keep going back to this, if he made that determination instantly that this was an empty classroom and this guy had sort of barricaded himself and there was no immediate danger, if he made that snap decision, that's one thing. But to stand by that for 40 minutes when there is a cacophony of evidence that suggests otherwise it goes beyond criminal. It's, at the very least, he should be fired. I hope he drops off the face of the earth. I don't see how in the world he could show himself in polite company ever again.
Voted in the city council.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, great. Just what we need in the government.
It's hard to imagine that, they didn't hear the shots going off. I don't know, maybe the shooter had a silencer or something, but you would think that they would have heard the shots inside the classroom. I mean, they have a timeline of what happened, so somebody heard, right? And they were the closest people to be there, so you would think they would be the one that hear it. And so, I mean, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't hear the gunshots, maybe they didn't hear kids shooting, but at the same time, it's like, well, how are they able to give this narrative out if they didn't hear it, right? And then it's like, okay, well, maybe the 911 calls that repeatedly came in somehow didn't get funneled down to the right people on the scene to give them, let them know that, hey, there's people inside classroom number, blah, 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 and they still need your help or something. Maybe something broke down there. You want to try to give them benefit out, but it's the longer this stretches out, the harder it is to give them that benefit of the doubt.
It's a great point.
Clear that something terribly bad went wrong. And I'd usually try to hate to be the Monday morning quarterback or whatever, and try to make it sound like I would have went in there, pew, 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 and all that, because I want to be realistic. But at the same time, this was obviously a huge failure, and I think that there's not really much disagreement on that. So it's just a matter of getting out all the details and facts to see exactly how big of a failure it was.
Yeah.
I think it's, I mean, this has the potential, depending upon how much we find out about this. I don't want to say it's going to, be a national change or a cultural change for us, but for a whole lot of people, it's going to change the way they view not just police officers in particular, but law enforcement in general. The pandemic has really taken a big toll. I know it has on me in terms of my view of the boys and girls in blue, and something like this, boy.
I think the pandemic took a toll on the right in terms of their perspective on cops, because I don't think it affected the left at all.
No, I think you probably got
it's all one side.
Yeah, for a lot of people, again, like I said, up until the pandemic, my default position was give the benefit of the doubt to the cops. Yes, you still have to explain yourself, you still have to justify when you use force, but I understand, I get it. I don't do that anymore. Not after the pandemic, certainly not after this.
So here's my problem with the way, and I'm not saying this about you at all, Chuck, I don't think this is true for you, but the way that people evaluate cops. And so I agree that probably some of the data is distorted because the people reporting the data are often the people who are responsible for, being held accountable by the data. So obviously they're not going to want to report things that don't reflect on them positively a lot of the time. So I do agree with that. What I don't like, though, is to go from, okay, this cop, and this cop did a really bad thing. Now all cops are bad. or, and I know, we get into this bad apples, conversation, and that sort of, it's been, that idea has been sort of stigmatized when you have this debate. But for me, it really is like, if you go to a police department, I have police in my family. I have really close friends that are police that I talk to all the time. And, my conversations with them is, yeah, there are assholes, just like at any other job. There are jerks and dicks and people who do things that they shouldn't do.
Problem is, these assholes have guns, Nick, and they can arrest you and kill you.
That's right.
The problem.
So right. So yeah. So the responsibility is a little different. It's not like they're putting tomatoes on hamburgers, right? Their responsibility is a little bit higher. Duly noted. I completely agree with that. But I guess at the same time, the vast majority of police officers that I work with, and again, I'm on the other side of this a lot of the time. So, I mean, they're genuinely, these are just people, right? These aren't like evil. I mean, people say things like they're terrorists, state terrorists, stuff like that. I just find that kind of rhetoric ridiculous. I find the idea that a small group of individuals spread out throughout the country that engage in really bad or corrupt behavior is emblematic of all of the entire police force. And I feel like I feel like there's a way of approaching this topic and evaluating it fairly without doing that.
Sure.
And that's what I want to stay away from, like the sort of prejudiced, bigoted arguments, or you know what I mean, like the stereotyping.
Well, just as all cops are bastards is incorrect, all cops are saints is incorrect. I mean, we have to have
100%.
Yeah, we have to be able to view this soberly. And like I said, I used to sort of, lean in the direction of the police. Now I'm a lot more neutral than I used to be. But even then, years ago, I mean, if it was a bad shoot or a bad use of force, yeah, you call that out. I mean, this is again, we collectively, all of us are arming people and giving them powers of arrest, powers to use lethal force if necessary. Got to be a high standard for that. There must be a high standard for that. But yeah, it's very, like you said, the whole mentality, all cops are bastards and all that doesn't help anything. That's it's untrue and it's not productive.
The other part of this too is that if you go from being, skeptical of police officers or holding them accountable to just hating all of them and going on this nationwide sort of, campaign against cops, nobody wants to be a cop anymore. And I know in Rhode Island, that's a big problem. Like, people aren't even trying out. People are leaving the force because they're so stigmatized right now. So when that pool of people becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, the kind of cop you're going to get isn't going to be as good. So this conversation, and here's the other part. Hello, everybody on the left. You're not going to get rid of the police force. They're here to stay. No one's ever going to agree to that. That's insane. It's stupid. It's politically unpopular. Stop saying it. It's not an option, period. Right? I just want to shut you right down. So if we accept the fact that we have to have a police force, and at the same time accept the fact that they need to be held accountable, we can both show respect for the cops who do a good job and admiration, right? Really, because admiration is where, I mean, a person who actually lays their life on the line. And I'm not saying that every cop goes out every day and does that, because they don't, but the ones that do, right, and save people and keep the peace and do the right thing and aren't corrupt, they deserve nothing but that. And when we find out that somebody has sort of, is corrupt or hasn't done the right thing, then we hold them accountable. But we don't just apply a label to all of these people, especially when their job is to protect us. Because you're not helping anybody. You're not helping any communities. You're not helping anybody. So that's it. I'll shut up.
No, you won't.
Nah.
Well, I mean, I agree that it's not a good idea to paint any labels too broadly whatsoever, whether you're talking about people of a certain race, a certain gender, a certain, job occupation, whether even if that's politicians, because we even like to say all politicians are corrupt. I like to think of everybody as human beings first, and deal with things on an individual level. And that just, to me, that helps me to understand everything that I go through in life a lot better than if I just use a blanket story. Because then once I say, hey, politicians are corrupt, then all of a sudden somebody gives me a conspiracy that suggests that they're corrupt, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have to believe it, all of a sudden, because that's something they would do because they're corrupt, but instead of actually needing evidence and different things like that. So I think that overall, in general, we're a better society, we're better people, we're better community together if we just show a little bit of grace to each other and just apply things to where they apply. Try not to go too much further than what that is. So that makes good sense. And at the same time, we also need good systems of accountability, of course, right? If you who's given much power, much is what's the who's given much is
great responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, what he said. So so I mean, like I said, you give cops, they have a weapon, they have the power to take life of citizens. You're giving the government the power to take away life. That's not something that you just give too easily, right? And so there's a lot of responsibility that comes to that. And so when it comes to court, usually we give police the benefit of the doubt that when they give a testimony, that if they say that this person did X, Y, and Z, that's just as good as catching on videotape if there was none a lot of times. And so so in the cases where something does go wrong and go bad, and and if it's just one person's word versus a cop, 9 times out of 10 in the court, the cop's word is going to get the ride at the end of the day. As well as when something goes wrong, like in a shooting case, for example, a lot of times they're in charge of investigating themselves, right? And we know of stories where we've had police departments that have withheld information and made certain types of decisions because they didn't think it would look good if it came out to the public what happened and different things like that. And so there are things that have legitimately eroded trust in police that have happened over the years. Whether or not you spread that widely or not, is one thing. But one way to cut down on that is to give just good systems of accountability that allow people to have a fair chance. That when something goes wrong, that it has an actual good shot of being caught. That if there's certain people, if you have certain people on your roster who are making a whole bunch of arrests along the lines of resisting arrest, and that's the only charge they're getting, and this officer's getting like 5,000 of those, and he's also getting just as many complaints compared to the rest of the force, there has to be some type of system that reads those type of people out, right? There has to be systems that prevent people from bouncing from one department to another who are bad cops and different things like that. And when people push back against creating those types of systems of accountability, that helps further entrench these mindsets of just saying, forget it, I'm mad, they're all corrupt, or people going to the extreme and saying, let's get rid of all the police, right? We see that a lot in politics. We're mad at maybe government overspending and abusing its power or something like that. We're like, man, get rid of the whole department of fill in the blank. And even though they do serve good purposes, right? We all kind of go to that extreme. And that's kind of what's happening with the left in terms of defund the police. There's some people that mean it in the sense of, okay, maybe use some of the funds for police to also go towards other services or whatever support, or whether it has to take away from the police or they just supplement and add it on, whatever.
That doesn't fit on a bumper sticker though. So
yeah, it does not fit on the bumper sticker and very well, and so it sounds terrible, and so it's a lot of politics that ends up playing on that football. But there are also people who are very serious about defund the police, as in zero police whatsoever. And but there's also a lot of anarchists who just want craziness and wildness to go on at the end of the day. And if they're just so fed up with the lack of accountability systems and things like that, they're just throwing their hands up and like, forget it, I don't want anything altogether, and I'll just get my own gun and protect myself, and we'll just see what happens, type of thing. So we just have to be better neighbors to each other in order to have a better society with good ideas and not have to go to these different extremes to find good solutions.
That's great. I agree with all of that. Yeah, 100%. I don't know what to say. I've never agreed before like this.
Well, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, how would you disagree with that? Of course, I mean, we got
We're
to.
gonna edit that agreement off the video
That's
after
yeah,
this. So
But no, I mean, we've said it before. I'll say it again. I mean, if we, with great power comes great responsibility, and if you don't want to be held accountable, if you do not want to have your actions gone over with a fine-tooth comb, then there's a billion other professions out there for you. If someone we're going to arm and give arrest power and the power to legally commit violence, you're going to be held to a very, very high standard. And yes, Nick, you're right. I mean, the whole all cops are bastards thing is simply not productive. That's not going to help anybody.
Yeah. So I'm interested because I heard this thing about this Supreme Court case where they ruled that what is it that police aren't responsible for protecting you?
Yeah, there's no, well, I think the ruling basically concluded that there is no constitutional duty or constitutional requirement
Right.
for police to risk their lives to protect you.
So, I mean, a couple of things, anytime I hear this goes through my head. The first thing is, who's interpreting this opinion? What was the composition of the court at the time that the opinion was written? And what was the political situation around this particular event? It makes sense to me, to be honest, that they would rule like that, because there really isn't, I mean, from an originalist or a textualist perspective,
Sure.
anything in the Constitution that dictates that police are responsible to, do this, whatever, protection.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as unpopular as this ruling is, I mean, I've read nothing in the Constitution that requires a police officer to do that. There's a lot of things that are not in the Constitution, and you can't just put them in there because you think it sounds good. Again, but I think it's safe to assume that we have all been operating under the understanding that when we give you a gun and we give you this kind of authority, we do expect you to get your fingernails dirty when it hits the fan. And how many times have we seen, police officers or anybody in any type of law enforcement say, yes, I understand. I've got to be willing to lay down my life to protect the public. I mean, it's implicit, I think, in terms of the not just the social contract, but the actual employment contract that we as a society use. But yeah, in terms of the Constitution, because this question revolved around constitutional culpability, then there is no.
So that's where these things get murky, because they take on like this trendy, trendiness to them. And it's no, I mean, it sounds right. Like, this isn't a constitutional question, period. Right. This is not a constitutional question, is what I'm hearing, which is probably what was the way it was written.
Well, which is amazing to me, because again, one of the arguments that supporters of enhanced gun safety point to is that, well, I mean, you've got police to protect you. No. Don't not by the. I mean, they don't have to. It's a nice bonus if they show up, I guess. But
these situations. I mean, this was the final topic I wanted to get into. We could talk about this all night, but it's like anytime these mass shootings happen, both sides of the political spectrum go this way, right? The right goes, nope, we need more guns, and the left goes, nope, take everyone. And it's like. Why doesn't anybody see the problem? If you're starting over here, there's no way you're going to meet here. And because the conversation starts over here every single time, we never get here, and we never solve anything, and nothing gets done. If you're going to sit there and tell somebody that you're going to take all their guns and all this kind of stuff, I mean, first of all, what do you actually say? If you ban guns, let's say you did that, what is that saying? That's saying that you're going to send people, some sort of state representatives, authority, into people's houses and take their property. That's essentially what you're saying. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's not going to end well, right? It's just not. So, no. It's just not a realistic option, right? The other option is saying nobody can ever buy a gun again. But in order to do that, you have to amend the Constitution. And that's not going to happen because there's no way that we're going to get to that amount of support for amending the Second Amendment. So I guess my question is, all right, so I feel like this is an access issue, right? That there's a certain person out there who keeps having access to these weapons of mass destruction. And I say that because I don't know what the hell to call them. What I do know is every time I get into a fucking conversation with some sort of gun expert, it always ends up turning into this, ridiculous situation where they're basically like, well, that's not an assault rifle. And I end up the conversation going, you know what I'm talking about. We've all been there. And the conversation ends up going nowhere. And I feel like
I've been that other guy, Nick. You know this.
Yeah, you're that guy. And so like you end up like not accomplishing anything at the end of the day because you're so focused on how the fuck to define a gun, right? And it's almost like I got tricked into this. So I just say weapons of mass destruction. So I guess the question is, forget about all of that. How do we prevent these crazy sons of bitches who are getting these guns, a lot of them, a lot of young men, right? Getting these guns who have obviously are socially alienated and antisocial behaviors, right? Some of them have like neurological disorders. I think there's been some people on the spectrum in the past, definitely mental health issues, maybe borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, people who have really been isolated socially, probably for the entirety of their life. They're, it tends to be when they're younger and more immature and don't understand things. And so how do we keep the guns away from them? And I know for my job, just sort of throwing this out there, I've had cases, and I can't get into specifics, obviously, but cases where I'm like, that dude is the dude, right? That's the guy right there that we need to watch out for. And so in those cases, I call the local police, I call the state police, I call whoever I have to call, because I don't want to be the person that doesn't dot my I's, right? So in any event, so what do we do? How do we keep, because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. What we need to do is prevent these people from getting these guns. That's it.
I have no idea, because how many times have we seen after one of these mass shootings that there were obvious red flags 2 years ago when such and such did this or said this, or we see the red flags sometimes, but how do you differentiate between a potential mass killer and someone who was just a dorky little kid that got bullied? I mean, not every dorky little kid is going to go mad and shoot up a school. Do we deny constitutionally enumerated rights because someone's a little off? There's no background check in the world that would have caught this guy because he had no prior record, mental, criminal, nothing, other than being the kid that was bullied. That's not a criteria to deny a constitutional right. We can't do that, not unless we.
Well, that's a great point. So let's take this situation. In this situation, what realistic gun law, right, would have prevented this guy from doing this?
Nothing. There's nothing. Again, if you could say in this particular instance, if the age of purchasing firearms for everyone was raised to 21, I mean, technically that would have delayed it for a few years. I don't think he's going to be any better at age 21 than he was at 18. That's the only thing I can think of. But I mean, in that sense, I mean, you're just sort of delaying the inevitable, I suppose. But no, in terms of a functional constitutional gun law that would prevent someone with no prior criminal or mental record from accessing guns, there's not a background check in the world that's going to catch that. So then if a standard background check is not going to catch them, what's the next step? The next step is infringement. Infringement on what is a constitutionally enumerated right. There's no way you can assume someone is going to use this gun for evil purposes just because they were a strange little kid. I mean, that's not a criteria. That's certainly not a criteria to deny a constitutional right. The only way you can thwart that is to somehow deign to possess the power to decide this kid who looks strange and was bullied, nah, you don't get to enjoy the Second Amendment. You get into infringement. I don't see any other alternative, not a reasonable alternative, or certainly not a constitutional one.
Yeah, there are, well, there's no easy answer to the question. If there was one, we would have already found it. But you know, we definitely are highly polarized on this topic. I think every time a school shooting happens, people on the right tend to say, you know, this is, you know, don't inject politics to it, or, you know, this is too close to the situation, kind of just to shut the conversation down. But I think that, I mean, if you, depending on how you define mass shootings, I mean, they tend to be happening all the time, and so there'll never actually be a good time from that perspective. But I mean, I think that in light of a shooting, that's actually, you know, probably a good time to talk about it, because, you know, people's lives are on the line. Well, how do we stop it for next time? But I mean, I think that there are places where a lot of the right actually agrees with a lot of the left on these things, but we still can't get things done because I think there's a lot of phobia about fear that if you give an inch, you know, this is just going to be that's the first step to the next step of taking all the guns away or something like that. And I think that the NRA helps pump that narrative. They help. I think it helps sell guns a lot too, just to say, hey, they're about to come take your guns and stuff. Come load up some more. And gun manufacturers, they probably love the NRA for it. They make, you know, they give more money to the NRA and all this other stuff. So, but I mean, I think most of the Democratic Party, I would say, is not planning to take any guns away. I don't know anybody who actually has that platform of taking all the guns away. They may have more stricter, you know, you may know better than I do, but
at least if I judge what they're telling me, I mean,
they may have more stricter regulations that they want to do, but in terms of sending a unit out and taking up any guns, I don't know of any president or anybody, you know, with any serious power that's trying to do that from the Democratic Party. And like Nick said, that, you know, we're not going to have a constitutional amendment passed. When was the last time we've had an amendment passed? It's been a while. So I don't see us coming together to make that happen at all. 98. So we're in a very tough situation where there aren't as, I mean, there's certain laws that might be able to curb some shootings, but of course there's not going to be a law. There's some things that might be like you were suggesting. You said the exact same thing I was thinking, like if you raise the age, because the guy was already 18, so you probably have to raise up to like 21, kind of like we do with cigarettes or alcohol, at least. I don't know about cigarettes, but you know, raise the age up to that limit or something like that, and that might deter some things. And I know there's a lot of shooters that that purchased their gun like recently, right before the actual shooting or something like that. So you start thinking like, okay, what can we do to maybe, you know, people think about maybe if there's a delay, and whether that delay just, you know, just hold, you know, makes it wait like a few extra days and they still do it or not, or, you know, what ends up going into all that. And then you have to say, okay, if we require a psych eval on the spot, you know, as you go to get a gun, and who does that and all that stuff, and how does that all play out? There's a lot of, you know, and then you got to wonder about, well, if we get an out of control authoritarian government who just says that everybody fails their psych eval and nobody gets guns or something, you know, that's the other extreme of it all, you know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you're the possibility that you know, Joe Bob passes the mental evaluation, but Donnell does not. That's a possibility, because again, I don't want to give the government that kind of power.
Yeah, I mean, there would have to be some type of system that disconnects that decision-making process from the government itself and puts it in the hand of actual professionals if it were to go down that road.
Well, another factor to consider is there's no other constitutional right for which we have to demonstrate a worthiness to enjoy.
Yeah.
I don't want to start down that road. Yes, slippery slope. It's called a fallacy, but it's not. I mean, it usually work. But
but I mean, I think one thing that I would definitely support would be to reinstitute the assault weapons ban. I think that the most of these shootings, they're using these AR-15s for a reason. I would think that. So if for some reason they didn't have access to them, sure, it's possible they can grab another different weapon and start shooting too. And then people
Virginia
start
Tech
talking
shooter.
about how big of a clip they have, and time to reload and saving live, and get into all that different things down that line. And this is where Chuck comes in as the expert, because I'm just as bad as Nick. I don't know. I mean, while I am a handgun owner or whatever, but I'm not, an expert by any means whatsoever to be
I'm
able
not
to.
an expert. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I know more than the average person, perhaps, but not an expert by any stretch.
So what is
Yeah.
that? What is that argument then? What is the, so I get the assault weapons ban, it bans specific guns, right? And from what I understand from having these conversations, a lot of those guns weren't necessarily the most dangerous guns or the most efficient guns.
They had cosmetic features. That was
Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember in one of the school shootings, where when Trump was president, he ended up banning bump stocks,
Bump
right?
stocks. That was after the Las Vegas shooting. Would you like to see my bump stock? No, I still have mine. I ain't gonna get rid of it.
But it was just like it was
Such a nothing thing. Pointless.
Nothing.
Absolutely pointless.
One thing that I thought was a good policy. So I don't want to get too sidetracked, but there was one during the Obama administration. I don't know if it's been retracted since, but it was something to do with people who have a history of severe mental illness.
Some of the red flag laws or something like that.
Is that still in place?
No. I think what you're thinking of, Nick, is the people who had severe mental illness to the point where someone had to legally co-sign for them. They could not buy, but the ACLU of all people challenged that back when the ACLU was actually interested in liberties. They successfully challenged that, and of course Trump rescinded it and made it a moot point in 2016. But yeah, again, 2 words: due process. It eliminated due process. You have got to have due process if you're going to strip a constitutional right from someone. Red flag laws, I'm willing to listen, but the adjudication process, that is the point at which due process is granted, has got to be quick. Has got to be quick. Otherwise, anyone could take guns from anyone by saying anything at any time. It has to be adjudicated very, very quickly. Same thing if they were going to take your computer away to violate your First Amendment.
So let's just get rid of all the hubbub, right? And let's just say, how do we restrict to a certain degree specific weapons that aren't necessary, military grade weapons that kill really fast, or not necessarily even restrict, but make it much harder to get, or maybe only people who've owned a gun for a certain period of time responsibly can access them, or something like that? Why can't we do that?
The Virginia Tech shooter used the Glock and a 9mm. And he had a much, again, if I were going to do something like this, I would much rather have short guns.
What is all right? So, but isn't there something like that he put on the 9mm or the Glock that made it?
No, they just accepted 20-round magazines. That's
okay.
It.
And is it automatic? Like boom, 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 boom?
It's a semi-automatic. Yeah, automatics are covered by the National Firearms Act of 1934. They're not illegal, but you have to have a federal tax stamp to buy them, and plus they're bloody damned expensive.
Okay.
But yeah, 80%, the category semi-automatic covers about 80% of the firearms in the United States. Glocks, 9mm, most everything. The only thing that's not semi-automatic is either fully automatic machine gun, Kalashnikov, or a revolver, like you see the 6-shooters, something like that. That's not semi-automatic in that respect. But yeah, when someone says to ban all semi-automatic weapons, that's about 85% of the weapons in the United States. That would be an absolutely Herculean undertaking to do.
All right, so not ban them, but make them harder to get. And what I mean is,
Do you
all
mean
right,
infringe?
if-
Sorry. Goodness.
what did you say?
So did you mean infringe? I'm sorry.
Oh, probably.
No, I know what you're
I
saying.
mean, I guess. All right, so there has to be some sort of balancing, right? There has to be. You have to be able to say, at least to some degree, all right, I'm willing to say that I would allow this type of, and gun owners have, right? I mean, to a certain degree, I mean, there's been compromise, right? There's not been no compromise. There's been some compromise. Do you think it would be fair to say that as a result of these mass shootings and the kids dying and these people being able to get access, that at the end of the day, we should at least keep our gun owners too, right? Everybody keeps their mind open to some sort of compromise where we could potentially, prevent or make it much harder for some of these people to get some of this more high, efficiency weaponry.
Devil's in the details. I mean, how do
The
we?
devil. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Right. I know what you're saying, because you don't want to be like, you don't want to sign on to something that.
Well, you talk about compromises being made. The only one side has made the compromises.
I'm intentionally being ambiguous.
Sure,
But the reason I'm doing it is because it's like, what's the point of even having the conversation if the other side has already said, nope, I'm not going to do any of that, right? So at least if the other side, being, I guess, gun owners, more likely right-wing people, are open to the possibility of there being some more restrictions on guns, if necessary, if at the end of some sort of, assessment that it was found that this particular thing might work, right? They would be open to that possibility. But at least, so I guess the question is, if you could have prevented this kid from buying a gun, obviously you would have, right? I mean, there's no doubt anybody would have.
In hindsight.
So, yeah. I guess I'm just trying to find a way to have the fucking conversation, because at this point it's like we can't even talk about it.
It's hard. It's
like
very hard. Yeah.
very hard. And it's not just hard because people are assholes. Because I tend to be, I tend to agree with Democrats and the left on this topic to some extent. I'm not a huge gun person. I've lived in a rural, place my entire life. My whole family has guns. They all hunt. My wife's family has guns, all that stuff. But for, me in particular, I'm not, I have no guns myself, and I've never really have shotguns, but not really that much. So, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out how we get to over here so we can find some sort of solution that everybody's sort of happy with. And it's hard to do because, number one, nobody trusts each other, like Chris said. And, yeah. And number two, it's complicated because there's a constitutional amendment. Like, what the fuck, founders? Could you have clarified?
Could you have made it a little less ambiguous, I guess? Maybe not use 18th century phraseology, even though
There you go.
Yeah.
Have you read
I mean,
those
when
papers?
when that was written, right, in the Constitution, of course, we didn't have, all we had was pretty much that regular old, what was it, muskets and stuff like that or whatever. So
they had puckle guns then, which is
they had what?
The puckle guns, which are the precursor to the Gatling gun, which is more familiar. But they had to know that as time went on, weaponry would become more efficient. I mean, we did not have digital electronic communications in the 18th century. Internet and digital communications is most certainly covered by the First Amendment. So,
what about cannons? Did we have cannons?
Cannon is not well. You can buy a cannon today. There's nothing preventing you other than cost.
Well, we had cannons.
You can't buy a nuclear weapon, for example, today, right?
Nuclear weapon's not a firearm. That's an incendiary.
So, if there were cannons back then, did the founders think it was okay for a private person to own a cannon?
They didn't say it wasn't. I mean, cannon is a firearm in that it by the definition of what's a firearm, you can buy a cannon today. I mean, other than the cost, there's nothing preventing you from buying a cannon today.
I guess I have to just read more about it. I know one person who is really, really good on this topic is Charlie Cook from National Review.
Mhm.
He's extremely well versed in the jurisprudence and all of that.
Yeah.
And you know, I've listened to some of the stuff he says, and you know, I mean, it's National Review, so it's super conservative, right? And he's also pretty libertarian himself.
Yeah.
But his you know, his perspective on it is we're fucked. I mean, listening to them having a conversation on the National Review podcast with Rich Lowry and Jim whatever Garrigan or whatever.
Garrigan,
yeah. It's really, I mean, depressing, because they're basically like, so this is sort of what I was talking about at the beginning, is that America, it's not just the guns. I mean, the guns, the fact that we have so many guns distinguishes us, period, right? It distinguishes us from almost all other countries. But there is there's something else there, right? There's like a sickness in our culture right now where people are, right? Because it's like, this didn't happen 25 years ago. I mean, Columbine happened, right? But like, not to this extent. Like, what is the difference now from now to then? What is happening now?
Yeah, you and I feel sure you've seen it in your line of work, Nick. Maybe it'd be hard for, well, it might be hard because you're so damn young, you don't have a long frame of reference, but you know, back in the 80s, we didn't do, you know, things like that. But we are not equipping our children by and large with emotional coping mechanisms, I fear. And again, they're being told at every turn that their feelings are the most important thing in the universe, and it's important to them, obviously, but and I don't think we're giving them the proper discipline to say, okay, when you're feeling bad, this is what you do. When, you know, someone disrespects you, this is what you do. No, we focus so much on, I fear the pendulum has just turned too far the other way. It used to be, you know, children were to be seen and not, you know, heard. Now we've done it, the classic overcorrection, where, you know, we're self-actualizing children, you know, above all else. There's nothing wrong with that. But far too many, and I see this in young adults too, and I'm starting to see the fruits of this. I mean, I hate to use a cliche, but the participation trophy generation becoming young adults, and I don't think we have given them the proper coping mechanisms. Example was a few years ago, my boy at the time was 7, 8, 9 years old, and he just got a Hot Wheel. And he was, I live at the end of a cul-de-sac, and he was barreling down, and the neighbors, she was at the time about 30, very young, and she was appalled that my son did not have knee pads, elbow pads, helmet, and I mean, just really pissed at me. And I never had a fucking elbow pad or helmet. Jiminy Christmas, are you kidding? But it demonstrated to me there's a generational difference at work here. She was part of the knee pad generation. I was not. Of course, my son wasn't either, because yeah, he scratched himself up sometime and he got back on the dadgum bike and did it again. But again, that's probably way too simplistic an observation. And of course, the problem is really, really deep seated, and there's millions of reasons, I guess. But I guess, long answer short, it's a generational thing.
Yeah,
Chris.
I think that we definitely do. Too many people think of guns as a realistic way to solve their problems. Basically, their basic problems, disagreements and beefs and all that stuff. That guns are a way to solve that. They also feel like it's a way of getting status. That if I carry a gun around, I'm cool and all this stuff. That makes me macho. That makes me manly and all this other stuff. And so there's some of that imagery that we got to push back on. I think that I know America, we push up, we're known for our movies to a lot of people in the world, and we have a lot of action movies, shoot, shoot, bang, bang, and it makes it look all cool and all that stuff. And I know that other countries, they consume our movies too, but a lot of times they see those as oh, those are Americans doing that shooting. That's not what we do, you know? Whereas when we watch it, it's like, oh, I can see myself as the man doing that in that movie, you know? And I think maybe some of that gets into some people's psychology to where they actually, you know, end up thinking that that's the way that they can go about things. It definitely is more than just having the guns there. I mean, we definitely do have way more guns than any other country in the world. But there are also countries that have a decent number of guns available that don't see nothing, you know, nowhere, anywhere close. This is a uniquely American problem that we have here. The rest of the world does not do it. They're looking at us like, wow, it's crazy in America. They're issuing travel advisories when they go to America, like stay away from malls and schools and places where a lot of people gather because
don't go to the places where people go.
yeah, you know, you want to avoid where a lot of people are. If there's fewer people, it's a good place to go. Probably won't be a mass shooting there, but so it's kind of crazy. And we definitely have no faith and trust in each other. I think that's a big part of it too. There's not a lot of goodwill towards one another, and it's getting worse with time, it seems like. I remember actually one time I was debating with somebody on the right who they actually agree with me. This dealt with universal background checks, because you know there's the different gun show loopholes or whatever that I've heard about, whatever, and says, okay, why don't we just make it universal where everybody needs a background test? And the person actually agreed with me 100%. It's like, yeah, we should have background tests. It's like, all right, well, let's just go ahead and, you know, have call our representatives and push for it and have it happen. And they just would not go for it because again, there was the slippery slope argument, right? You know, there was no trust, there was no good faith in one another that, hey, we can come together on this one good thing, and maybe it might be able to slow one case down here or two cases, whatever it is slowing down, we might be able to make some progress, but there's just no good faith trust in the other side. And I think that there's a model in our country for the media, for the politics, that breeds that distrust, that wants it to be deeper because it wins races. Let's just flat out, you know, that negative politics that divides us apart, it keeps people loyal and faithful to voting for parties and stuff. So
keeps them tuned into the cable channel too.
Yeah. So with all that going on, it's hard to get to a point where, you know, we love one another, you know, the way we should as a country, to where we would think that, you know, picking up a weapon would be like, that's crazy, that's stupid. Why would we even go that direction? But we despise one another so much because it's bred up so much. It's become so normalized to just kind of have this despising of one another that I think that it becomes a little bit easier to pick up weapons and start doing stuff and just be like, F it, I'm getting sick and tired of it all.
Yeah. And before, I mean, we're probably getting close to closing here. I will gladly plead guilty on the no trust part. I do not trust people.
Oh, we know, Chuck.
I do not. That well has been poisoned for many, many years. I wish I could let my guard down, but boy, howdy.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
But you know, again, if the ubiquity of guns was the only precursor or the main precursor to gun violence, then every gun show would be a bloodbath because there's no place where guns are more plentiful. So the availability, yeah, that's certainly a factor, but it's not an overriding factor, I don't believe. Again, if that were the case, then we would routinely hear about mass shootings at gun shows. The reason people don't open fire at gun shows is they know it would be a very short episode if they did.
You know, I think in these types of situations, when you sort of propose these ideas, like what's the difference between now and then? Oftentimes it depends on who you ask, and people will frequently say, well, this is the difference. And it always somehow aligns with whatever their political philosophy, underlying philosophy is anyway. I don't know. I think that the United States has an epidemic of narcissism. I think Chris hit on it a lot. Mm-hmm. I also think that that's all intertwined in that sort of safety stuff that you were talking about, Chuck, with the knee pads, right? Like instead of dealing with things on your own or learning how to cope with things, everybody's trying to protect you and hold you in and tell you you're the greatest and give you your trophy and do all that kind of stuff. And I do think it's probably the reason it's so hard to put your finger on is because it's probably a lot of different things happening at once. And it's so complicated that we're just not able to sort of put our fingers on it. But I think that somewhere in there, there's this, there's egocentrism that's just going crazy, right? And I think that plays a part in this, the shooter's motives, right? Because now what is their number one motivation, right? Is to go out and be famous, right? And to they've given up on everything else, right? Obviously, and this is their legacy. And so there's something obviously crazy and sick about that. So that would be my diagnosis. But yeah, I think it's time to get going. My wife is home from Target, so I know that means I gotta go.
Then it means you're broke.
Yep. The count in the red.
That's right. All right, guys. I appreciate everybody coming on. This is a great discussion. Had a lot of fun.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, I'll see you guys soon.
All right, take care.